If you have a friend or a family member or loved one who struggles with borderline personality disorder, then you know the difficulty of this problem, and you may be at a loss of how to respond in an effective and helpful way. If this sounds like you, then I encourage you to stick around. Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kayla and I release new videos every Monday about all things BPD. So if that sounds good to you, then I encourage you to hit the subscribe button down below as well as the bell notification up top. Now, I have been getting a lot of requests lately to do a video about how parents, partners, or friends can support someone who has BPD. And so I thought that today I would make this video. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, involves emotional instability, difficulty with interpersonal relationships, and impulsive, often self-destructive behaviors. Now, because they have a difficult time trusting themselves and others due to extreme and intense emotions, it can be really difficult to manage healthy relationships with themselves and other people, and for the people around them who love them to understand what is going on inside of them. The fundamental nature of BPD makes relationships difficult and intense, and families and friends and loved ones often have questions about how they can effectively help their loved one who has BPD, and having a strong support system can play a huge role in reducing maladaptive behaviors. So if you know someone in your personal circle who has BPD or BPD traits, there are strategies that exist that can help you to create a healthier environment for you and the person in it. The first step and strategy in supporting a loved one who has BPD is to simply learn about the disorder, which is exactly what you're doing right now. So congratulations, check that off your box. You are accomplishing it. So with learning about the disorder, the good thing about this is that we can then gain a better understanding as to why these behaviors are happening. And when the person feels understood, not only will it help to reduce the behaviors, but it can also help us respond more effectively. So take, for example, if you had lunch plans with your friend and you have to cancel on them kind of last minute because something comes up, an emergency. Typically, someone who doesn't have BPD might take it well and say, okay, maybe I'm a bit ticked off because now I don't have anyone to go to lunch with. That's okay, we'll reschedule, that's fine. If we take someone with BPD, for example, so if you had to cancel last minute lunch plans, this might be interpreted by them as a rejection, which triggers their fear of abandonment. And so the reaction may be huge compared to what you're normally used to with other people. And so if we don't understand this, if we don't understand that there is a fundamental fear of being abandoned in those who have BPD, then we're not going to understand the reaction. And so when we have this in-depth understanding of what causes these behaviors, then when things do happen, we can see them as a manifestation of these deeper layers of core beliefs or issues that they might have. And so we can address those feelings underlying the behaviors. We can validate the experience. We can say, you know what, given that you had other people leave you in your life, I can understand how having plans canceled last minute might trigger these memories and these fears that you have. We're not validating the fact that they're throwing a fit and maybe you're super angry, but we want to understand the experiences to reduce the behaviors. Does that make sense? The second strategy for supporting a loved one who has BPD would be to take care of yourself, and this is a classic example of the oxygen mask analogy in the airplane. So if you help others putting on their masks, you're going to run out of oxygen and then you won't be able to adequately help those who need you. So by putting on your mask first, you're actually doing more service to others. And when we have a loved one with BPD, it's also really easy to get caught up in this heroic mode where you feel like you need to constantly save them and please them and appease them. And what ends up happening is that you end up neglecting yourself. So you isolate yourself from others. You stop taking care of yourself physically, mentally. You may get depressed, and resentment grows in your relationship, which is ultimately very toxic for everyone involved. You can take care of yourself by avoiding the temptation to isolate yourself. So having a strong social support system to help you along the way, having a life outside of that relationship. So it's not selfish to carve time out for yourself. Joining BPD support groups, there's plenty. I know in Ottawa there are some, this is where I live, but there's some, I'm sure, all over Canada and the States and in Europe. So you can join one, especially now with COVID that everything is virtual. It can be really accessible to get a community and support from other people who are going through the same thing. And the last thing is to avoid blaming yourself. And you can do this by practicing the 3 C's, which is I didn't cause this, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. So taking some of that responsibility off of yourself, making sure that you are mentally and physically sharp can make you a better person, which will improve your overall relationship and the capacity to take stress. So for example, when you're really tired, it probably doesn't take much for you to snap. And this is the same thing with taking care of yourself in a relationship. When you're burnt out, it's easy to forget that maybe the person with BPD is reacting this way because they have their own trauma and fear of abandonments. And it's really easy to just see that behavior and focus on that thing and forget all the other reasons. So when we're well rested and well taken care of, we can then see things for what they are and not just this like behavior that is absurd. The third strategy would be to recognize patterns and triggers. So if you are a parent with a child who has BPD, it might be something noteworthy to track specific patterns or triggers that pop up. And I take this very lightly because I also recognize that this can have a lot of negative things if not done the right way. Now, you can choose to have a conversation with your child who has BPD as to whether or not this is something that they're okay with. Because if not done well, the thing with individuals with BPD is that they struggle a lot with self-image and self-worth and a lot of feelings of shame. Okay, so if you're tracking these things and you're trying to use it as a means to say, see, look at all the different times in the week when you had an outburst, you're not going to shock them. Okay, you're not going to give them this like magical revelation that they're going to say, oh, you know what? I really didn't know. Usually, people with BPD do tend to have a lot of self-awareness that these things are going on and that they're not socially normal, okay? And putting it in their face like that can cause a lot of shame and guilt and actually worsen the behaviors. So we want to tread very lightly with this, with the whole tracking thing. You can recognize patterns and triggers without formally tracking them, okay? And you can have conversations, having conversations about, have you noticed that when you don't sleep well or when you stay up really late, there tends to be an increase in being irritable? Or you can ask them, what are things that you've noticed that make you in a bad mood? So having open and honest conversations, it's also important on the flip side for you to recognize your own triggers and patterns because, as I mentioned, if there are specific things that set you off, or if you know that when you're hangry, then you're going to flip out at the person who has BPD who's in crisis mode, then that's also important information for you to have. So it's not just about knowing the patterns and triggers of your partner or friend or child who has BPD. It's also about recognizing those things in yourself, because the more self-awareness that we have, the more that we can be proactive rather than reactive. The next thing would be to structure the environment. And I know that this is really difficult because honestly, life is very unpredictable and it's not realistic to say that we're gonna have a fixed schedule and that every day is going to be the exact same thing. And no, that doesn't work, okay? There's things that happen. We need to change the schedule and go off track. But having a structure as consistent as you can, there's actually a therapy program called Rainbow for children who have mood disorders. And the whole premise of this program is based on getting the environment as structured as you can to reduce the instances of triggers. And this is the same thing with BPD. We need consistency, we need structure, we need boundaries. Okay, so individuals who have BPD sometimes have issues around trusting others because in their life, maybe they didn't experience what boundaries and safety looks like. So creating structure can actually create boundaries for them, and being consistent in your reactions to things. So if they're having, it's like children. So if a child is having a fit at Walmart and they're screaming because they want candy, and then you cave in one time and another time you say no, and then another time you react differently, the child will have a difficult time picking up on what the consistent reaction will be from the parent, and this can cause issues. So with individuals with BPD, we want to make sure that we are as consistent as we can be. Of course, this doesn't mean that they're going to mystically stop being triggered and having reactions. No, this is just about lessening the instances of reactions and triggers, which is beneficial for everyone. And when we're trying to set boundaries, it's also important to have conversations with those individuals about what seems appropriate. So you can have the conversation about, hey, this is something that happens a lot. What to you feels like a healthy and justifiable boundary, so that they're involved in this kind of ongoing discussion. It's not this rigid system that can't be moved. It's like trees outside in nature. The ones who are very rigid are the ones who will break when it gets really stormy and windy out, and the ones who are flexible and malleable are the ones who will stand the test of time. So we want to be like those flexible trees. We want to be consistent and sturdy, but not rigid to the point where it causes cracks and eventually a break in the system. My last recommendation would be to encourage professional help. So therapist or coach or whatever the medium feels right to you can be a great benefit. They can give you tangible tools. They can help you set up a structure and environment for success. They can give you a better understanding. And so I'm not just talking about professional therapy for the individual who has BPD, but also family therapies or couples therapy or support groups, as I had mentioned. So you want to verse yourself in all of these professional domains so you get the most information, you get the most tools, you get the most support, so that you're building this very strong support system to help yourself, to help the individual. Supporting a loved one who has a mental illness can be very difficult, very tricky to navigate. And so I hope that the tips and tricks that I gave you today can help you to build a strong support system and an environment that is conducive to adaptive and effective behaviors. As always, I'm really curious to hear from you. What are specific things that have helped you and your loved one gain trust and support along the way? So just leave me a comment in the comments down below. I always read and respond to all of them. It's one of my favorite parts, so don't be shy. And the best way to support my channel is really to share this video, to like it, because the more people watch it, the more that we help to spread awareness about BPD and to break down the stigma. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here with me today to learn about BPD, to learn about how you can be a better person to love and support the individual in your life who has this disorder. I will see you back here next time for another episode of On the Line.